Hello, everybody. Lovely to connect with you all. So my name is Jacqui Bohuslav-Andrews, and with us today is Michael Bohuslav. For those of you that I haven't met before, I am a yoga and meditation teacher. I actually was first introduced to transcendental meditation in my late teenage years. So that's over 30 years ago now, by my father and my mother. And in my early 20s, I went to yoga school and I've studied various forms of meditation and mindfulness. I've studied esoteric philosophy and progressive yoga relaxation. It's really been my life's work. For a long time, it was my full-time work. In more recent years, I've worked in corporate health. But regardless of what I do for income, it really is my life's passion. We are fortunate enough today to meet with Michael Bohuslav. So Michael has been a school teacher for much of his working life. He's also been a teacher of Eastern philosophy and esoteric teachings and ancient wisdom teachings. He lives down on the Surf Coast region. So for those of you that know Melbourne, Victoria, it's that lovely coastal area that takes you down the Great Ocean Road. So a very physically beautiful part of the world. And he teaches philosophy groups there in Torquay and nearby Geelong. He's been teaching philosophy for about 30 years, and for the past 15 years or so, particularly enjoys sharing his wisdom on the Bhagavad Gita. So I'd also like to share at this point that Michael is my father. So for those of you who perhaps know me or him, some of you will be Michael's students and you've perhaps participated in philosophy cafes or different philosophy groups. You're meeting the father-daughter duo. But I'll hand over to Michael now just to introduce himself a little further and fill in any gaps. Michael, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Jacqui. I did ask you to pump me up a little bit, but I didn't expect you to go to that extreme. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for those nice words, Jacqui. Jackie's given you an insight into her journey. Well, it mirrors really very much my own. So I see my life really in two parts. That there was the before and after, and nearly must have been about 47 or so I pinned it down to. Up until then, I'd been leading what might be called an everyday mortal existence, the same as basically all 8 billion people on the planet lead. Then I took on transcendental meditation, as Jacqui referred to, and that ended up being an enormous turning point in my life. It brought some stillness to me finally after a lot of years of constant mental, particularly mental sort of, planning and organising and trying to make money and all of these sorts of things. It gave me some respite, and the mind started to fall a bit still, and I felt a little bit more at ease. And in that particular moment, in one of those sort of moments of meditation, I heard a voice, and it simply said, "I can't believe that this is all there is to life." So it came as a total surprise to hear those words, because I hadn't studied any philosophy as such, and wasn't into any of that, if you like to call it, put it that way. But it certainly jolted me and into what I now understand and have understood, in hindsight and with the teaching, that was my what's called wake up call. And at that moment, I also realised that there were changes I needed to make in my life, and that these changes could come about, but I'd have to make an effort to, know how to do it and what to do and so on. Anyway, once again, I've seen that from my own journey and all the students I've worked with over the last 30 odd years, that once you wake up and you decide you want to make a fundamental change in your life, you instantly, like the universe provides, and there's that saying that when the student's ready, the teacher appears. So I instantly found a teacher, different teachers, groups over the years, until finally settled in, pretty quickly actually settled in. This was at the Melbourne School of Philosophy, with a great tutor that I came to regard really as my guru, and had a lovely association with him for the best part of 16 or 17 years. He taught me, introduced me to all of a lot of the stuff that we'll be covering in these podcasts, particularly the Introduction to the Eastern Philosophy, where the Gita became one of my favorite areas of study. So just on that point about the Gita, and I'll be doing these podcasts based on the teachings of the Gita. I've actually taught the Gita now to 2 groups from start to finish. I'm in the process of halfway through the 3rd group teaching the Gita, and now I'm embarking on basically a 4th group in a totally different way than I've ever done before, because I'm old school. I don't have a mobile phone. I don't have a computer. If it wasn't for Jacqui giving me a Christmas present of these headphones that I'm wearing, and asking would I teach the Gita, there was no way I'd be doing what I'm doing at the moment. So thanks, Jacqui, for giving me an enormous challenge, but nevertheless one I'm looking forward to, because I love the Gita, I love the teachings in it, and I love sharing it with anyone that would be interested in listening to it. So hopefully all you people that have tuned in and will continue to tune in over the coming podcasts, that you'll get something out of it, and we'll see how we go. Thank you.
That's perfect. Lovely. Thank you so much. It occurs to me now that it's really important to fill everybody in how this all came about. So I've got a lot of beautiful yoga teacher friends, but for a large portion of my life, I lived in central Victoria in Castlemaine, for those of you that know that area, and I taught yoga there while we were raising our young family. There are a disproportionately large number of wonderful yoga teachers in that region, and many of those are my lifelong friends. So recently, a few months ago, I was up in central Victoria, invited to a beautiful lunch with some yoga teacher friends of mine, and we were sharing all sorts of things about being a yoga teacher and how to run a business and how to get students and promote classes and what we're all learning and who we're studying with. And somebody asked a question about who's read what version of the Bhagavad Gita, and have you ever been part of any study groups? And I was sharing, saying, oh, how interesting. My father, well, firstly, I shared that even though I have many copies of the Bhagavad Gita on my bookshelf, I've never actually made it through any of them. Certainly, like as in read them in their entirety. Certainly, as part of my yoga and meditation training, I have studied segments and portions of them, but never in the entirety. So as I'm sharing this with my yoga teacher friends, it's sort of occurring to me that I have a living resource within my direct family unit, that being my father, a source of wisdom that I've not tapped into. And as my friend was getting curious, saying, well, where is your dad? Where's he located? Where does he teach from? How can we access some information? And I'm laughing and sharing that, as Dad's already shared with you, he doesn't do a computer, mobile phone. You're not going to find an online profile or online training courses. So after sort of just laughing and joking about that for a few days, I didn't mean to sleep on it, but I literally just slept. And the clearest way I can explain it is that it just brewed essentially in my sleep for a few days. And one day I just woke up and thought, hang on, I have a father who could teach people this. People are interested and curious. Why don't we do something about it? So I didn't actually ask Michael, would he be prepared to do these? I just gifted him the headset for Christmas and said, this is what we're going to do. And here we are. So that just gives you a little background and context as to how we arrive here, the two of us, why we came to think to share it. There's a lot of beautiful, online resources and things you can find. But I think for Westerners, sometimes it's really lovely to hear some of these teachings explained in a way that is perhaps a little more easy for us to understand. So I think that being the lead in, Michael, can you give us, please, an overview? The Bhagavad Gita, some of our audience may have heard of that book. Many may not. What is it? Why is it so important? And can you give us an overview as to this text?
Yes, of course I can, Jacqui. And I'd just like to refer to one of the comments you made where you're talking about that after the conversation with your lady friends, how you slept on it and how it sort of brewed. This is a classic example to everyone listening that the point I was making, that when one decides to commit to what I call the truth, in other words, they realise they want to make some sort of changes in their everyday lives and how they view themselves and the world around them. Once that commitment's made, it's described as the universe provides, and it gives you sort of extra support, if you like. And so you could hear from Jacqui's description that just unfolded naturally, that, oh, well, from that discussion, I haven't really studied it myself, but I know my father's been teaching it. And, you know, suddenly it becomes, well, I'll get him a set of headsets and ask him to do a summary on the Gita. So just a little example of how there's a bigger force behind all that we think we're doing as an individual that is there to sort of guide us along and support us once we make that desire to access what's called the universal truth more fully. So, Jacqui, to follow on from your request about giving a bit of a description on the Gita, just simply like to say from the outset that the Gita is one of the most profound teachings in the world. Although it comes from the East, it's not specifically designed just for people in India or, you know, the Eastern sort of Asian countries. It's a worldwide teaching by a worldwide master called Krishna. And he teaches the message that's applicable to all 8 billion people on the planet at this stage. So it's not religious, it's not for a particular race or for a particular part of the world or something. So I want to make that you know, clear from the start. The other aspect I need to stress very clearly to you all is that it's a massive teaching. It's a fundamental teaching designed to bring about enormous changes in the individual, obviously changes for the better that'll make them less stressed, happier, more contented beings. So you're better with your family, you're better with your partner, you're better at workforce, you're better with all your friends, you're better with all of the creation and humanity. So it's a massive sort of task that we eventually will want to undertake. And when we start that, well, we've got to be prepared to realise that it's not an easy fix. There's no such thing as a free lunch. We're actually required to put some effort and time and energy into it and practice the teachings. That's very important. The knowledge on its own is of no value. Has to be that practical application. So knowledge plus practical application leads you to what's called wisdom. You become a wiser person. Then under the umbrella of meditation, you learn to start becoming stiller, and then you might even take on meditation. So all of that ties in with the whole gist of the teachings of the Gita. But the other point that needs stressing is that because it's such a mammoth work, to try and cover it in 40 podcasts that Jacqui's got sort of planned, the most I can do, or anyone could do for that matter, is basically simply whet your appetite for the beautiful teachings, the beautiful gems that are in that Gita. And my hope is that for those of you who last the distance and continue right through to the end, sort of hope would be that some of what you might hear in these podcasts will inspire you to actually read the Gita, read it yourself. That'll still only be the very early stages. And eventually you'll probably end up having to join a group somewhere to be able to discuss and ask questions and clear up any sort of areas like that. But if I do nothing else but just whet your appetite and you look into it more deeply later, I'll feel I've done the work I've set out to do. All right. So just simply, I'll refer to a couple of jottings I've made. So if you already have some awareness of beginning or being on a journey, a spiritual journey, a notion of looking within journey, or if you've started to ask questions or been asking questions such as, who am I? What's the purpose of life? What happens when I die? These sorts of questions. Well, you're already off to a great start. My suggestion to you all is to just simply be as open as possible to these talks and simply allow what's called the sound of truth to do its work. try not to analyze every word I say and remember everything I say. Just be open, let it all soak in, and the truth itself will do the bulk of the work. Okay. I liken it just a simple example that what we'll be doing in these episodes is, you've all been involved, I'm sure, in doing jigsaw puzzles. Now, as you get older, when you're young, you do 6 pieces or 10 pieces, wooden pieces, and they fit in pretty easily, but they're important for the young toddlers. By the time we get sort of to an adult stage, we might tackle 1,000-piece or even a 10,000-piece jigsaw. Now, each piece is basically a little snippets that I'll be sharing with you during these podcasts. But until all those pieces come together in a completed jigsaw, you won't see the full picture. And so the Gita itself is very sequential. It follows, and I'll just elaborate on this in a few minutes, but it follows sequentially through the 18 chapters. So we do it step by step to get to the end of the destination. And in case you're wondering what the end of the destination is, or even if there is such a thing as the end of the destination, because there's a lot of people I come across that have a concept that there's no end to the journey. And I sort of feel, well, that's a bit of a oddity, really, that anyone goes on a journey, whether it's to fly here to Alaska or to go to Queensland or something, you know where their destination is. So to be on a spiritual journey and have no end doesn't make any sense to me. And it doesn't make any sense to the great masters. They all say that one way or another, from whatever era and whatever part of the world, at the end of the journey is what's called self-realization or enlightenment. So that's the end of the journey as far as the Gita, in particular the Gita teaches. So now I'd like to give some general background, if I could, Jacqui, even before we start talking about the Gita, but just a little bit of brief knowledge about the great masters, and where I get give the listeners a bit of an idea where I get my knowledge from and my understanding in these areas.
Yes.
So, okay, so throughout history, there's been many great masters, and you can call them sages or seers, or any reference you like of someone in past times that has greatness, and the greatness you can judge them by is the length of time that they've stayed relevant to humanity. So we've got people like Krishna in the teachings of the Gita that I'll be expounding. You're all familiar with the teachings of Buddha to some extent or other. Jesus was another great master. None of these people are religious. There weren't religions around. They're great philosophers, spiritual philosophers, whose main aim was to give valuable teachings to human beings as to how to lead happier and more profitable lives. Then you've probably heard of Sufis, the Zen masters, Lao Tzu from China. The great Egyptian sage is one of my favourites, Hermes Trismegistus. The Greek philosophers, Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, many of you would have heard of those. Shankara was another great one from the East. I mean, many others from all eras and all parts of the world. And they've left us a great legacy of great philosophical wisdom, which provides humanity with all of the answers that any of us need to help us get through life and be happier people. But without this knowledge, many humans at various stages in their lives find themselves lost, helpless, confused, caught up in the turbulence of everyday life. And so we see a lot of unhappiness in our life, in lives around us, in people around the world. There's wars, there's domestic violence, there's drug taking. There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety. All of these sorts of things are happening in people's places. The paradox really is that deep within every person is seeking happiness. Yeah, if you ask them what do they want, everyone will say $10 million. But really what they're wanting is that $10 million will provide them with some happiness. They'll be able to go on cruises, have nice meals, have nice clothes, all that sort of stuff. So deep down, behind whatever people might think will give them happiness, there's what's called true happiness. And that true happiness lies within. It'll never be found outside. We've got to be careful that we understand happiness as against joy or excitement of sensual objects in the world, power, wealth, whatever it might be, careers, families, all these sorts of things. They can give us joy, and that certainly, but not the full, true happiness that we're all desperately seeking. That can only come with it's always within. It's within every human being on the planet, but one has to turn their attention from out, looking out, and I'll give a lovely quote on that some stage, and turn that attention within. And when we connect with that, what's within, which is called our divine aspect, if you like, or our divinity, or our soul, or our godlike nature, there's different ways of saying it, but I'm sure many of you are familiar with these sorts of concepts. That connection is what gives us the ultimate happiness that we're seeking. All right, Jacqui?
Beautiful. That's a lovely overview and a summary. I particularly like, and I think a lot of the listeners will like, the jigsaw analogy, because I think with any sort of teaching like this, actually just take and digest what you can and what feels useful, but at the same time, keep that overview that actually, until you've heard a lot of this, the overview that will be provided in this series, and you learn more about it, sometimes those pieces of the puzzle might not come together and really resonate until later on. So really useful point. I read somewhere the other day, I'm not sure who this quote is from, but it was talking about the Bhagavad Gita, and it says, "The Bhagavad Gita is a book soaring above the anguish and the attachments of the world. It is a primer for moving toward a truly spiritual life." So that's certainly in line with the overview that you've just given. So wonderful. One question I have, and I suspect the listeners will have, many people, particularly if they've moved in yoga circles or meditation circles, or they've studied a little bit of spiritual philosophy, people have often heard of the book, the text, the Bhagavad Gita, but a lot of people don't necessarily understand the depth, and you've given a nice overview, and certainly we're going to get through to more of that. But I know, even in sort of mentioning to a few friends that I was doing this podcast series with you, and people will often refer to the fact that there's so many textbooks. Which one should I read? Which one's the best? Which one's useful? Can you put into context for the listeners, why are there so many different Bhagavad Gita texts? Who's writing them? Can you help people to understand the choice of what's on offer?
Oh, certainly, Jacqui. And I think if people are going to be listening to 40 podcasts on the Gita, they need to know a little bit of the background to it. So that's a lovely quote you read, and I'll have a similar one that I'll read out as well, along the same sort of veins. But maybe if we just go back a step and I actually give some background to the Gita itself.
Yes,
So
certainly.
the people I've just referred to was in a general reference to many of these great masters, all eras in different parts of the world, over thousands of years, have sent out the same message. So there's a saying in this work that there's only one message, but many messengers. So that was just that point I was making there for a few moments. And I wanted to go on then to say, one of the great masterpieces that is left from all these great people, now zeroing in specifically onto Krishna and his teachings to his student, who's called Arjuna, which is going to be us in the context of all these talks. One of these great masterpieces comes from the Eastern philosophy, and it's a book titled the Bhagavad Gita, and it's the teachings of Krishna. Okay, and so then I've jotted a few notes down that I think are important. So this bit of background I'm going to now share with you is about giving that I'm going to share. It might sound a bit heavy, but it's important if you're going to sitting on these lectures or these discussions in these podcasts over all these weeks, that it's important that you understand this great work, and a bit of a brief background to it is very important. So some of the jottings that I just want to run past you, and as I say, you don't have to remember any of it, just to give you a general big background to help you understand the enormity of it and the breadth and depth of it, and so on. So just simply, the Gita's it's not designed to for people living in the Himalayas in caves or meditating in forests and stuff like that. It's an everyday teaching, what's called for the family man, the individuals as we live in society today. So sure, there's people who, the great masters or the gurus meditate quietly away in the forests or the mountains, but this teaching's designed basically for everyday human beings in everyday lifetimes. So the Gita is considered by many to be the finest source of spiritual teaching in the world. It's a divine revelation and regarded as one of the greatest gifts ever given to humanity, transcending all barriers of time, space, and religion. It leads one to the ultimate state of enlightenment. Moreover, it gives us a philosophy of life, which can be applied in our domestic, official, and social activities. So it's for all people at any stages of our lives, whether it's families or at work and so on. Just trying to... there was a great Indian sage, Shankara, who's one of my favourite sages, going back about 1200 years. He describes Krishna's teachings as a part of combination of knowledge and action, which leads to wisdom and eventual self-realization or enlightenment. All this under the background of meditation. So the Gita itself is often referred to as the Song of the Lord, or poem, or simply the dialogue and conversation between two people, Krishna, the teacher, the universal Lord, and Arjuna, which is going to be representing each individual person, particularly any of the people listening to these podcasts. It's the main component or jewel of a great epic known as the Mahabharata. So the great epic, this great teachings from the East, one part of it is the Gita, but it's regarded as the jewel or the crown of the whole, what's called the Vedic teachings. The Vedic teachers, basically the main component is the Gita, but there's also an offshoot called the Upanishads. They're more detailed and esoteric sort of teachings, very hard to...
That might be our podcast series number 2.
Oh, yeah, good on you, Jacqui.
But one step at a time, hey?
Yes. And all of this, there's, because it dates back so far, there's always a lot of conjecture as to the amount of years. Some dated 2,500 years ago, some 10,000 years. To the best of my sort of reading of background on this, and because there were no records kept or anything like that, it's very hard to work out. But I've sort of zeroed into about 5,000 years ago. So I feel that the great masters all appeared at around about that time, and from 5,000 years ago, different ones have appeared and reinvigorated the message, if you like. So the message was originally an oral conversation, and that continued for thousands of years. After Arjuna and Krishna, it then became what's called the Guru and the Disciple teaching. Again, all so these 700, the 700 slokas in that, I'll get to that in a minute, but all of that was learned off by heart by disciples living and being with the Guru, and then they discussed it and understood it and put it into practice and so on. We don't have to do that. It's a lot simpler for us today, but the same principle still applies. So in a sense, you could say, I'm your Guru, you're all the disciples that are listening, and we're doing it via Zoom and media, which 5,000 years ago, none of it existed. So after it passed thousands of years of oral transmission, then eventually it became written transmission because books and printed material, and now it's on podcasts and can be viewed in the manner we're doing at the moment. So the book then itself is, and this is it's more answering the specific question you asked, Jacqui, that the book itself comprises of what are 700 verses, or in Sanskrit they're called shlokas. So just like in the Bible, there's verses, for John or for Peter or Luke or Mark. This is sort of in that same vein. So you can get a little Gita that's only got 700 shlokas, nothing else. Almost impossible. I would say impossible for any human being on the planet to read it. Wouldn't matter how many times, and you wouldn't get the full knowledge. That's the depth of it. So then you get great masters and gurus who add their commentaries to those shlokas. In other words, they help describe it so that we can better understand it. So the question you're asking specifically, Jacqui, is that there's probably about currently 300, 350 printed versions of the Gita available, anywhere in the world. And they're translated into many countries, many languages, because people want to learn this in Russia or China. Well, not so much in Russia and China because they're not allowed, but, in free countries and that, Germans and Italians and, whatever, have access to it in their relevant languages. The reason that there's 300 or 350 is simply that all of the Gitas will all have the same 700 verses. So they're the teachings of Krishna. You can't change that, otherwise it's not a Gita. It's not the teachings of Krishna. The 300 or 350, it doesn't really matter, but just, it's a limited number, but there's a fair few. So if you go into a bookshop that has these sorts of books, you might see 20 or 30 of them on the shelves. And you wonder, well, are they all different? Well, no, they're all the same. The difference is that the person who's writing the commentary puts his or her personal interpretation on the teachings. And that helps the reader then by reading how they're describing it and what they understand of it to get a better, a more deeper understanding of what's in the teachings of the Gita. And then if you're really keen, well, you'll have, like Jacqui was saying, she's got half a dozen Gitas or something. I've probably got about 20 on my shelves. And at different times, I've had all 20 open on the one verse and checking what each commentator, how they put it, so that I can get as clear a grasp on it. Not very often, but one I can remember specifically took me a long time to sort of unravel. So I had books on the floor over my study desk everywhere, and I'd flick from one to the other, all open at the same page. If it's chapter 7 and it's verse 36, well, you open all the books at chapter 7 on verse 36, and you could read them. So even if you had one, that's all you need. If you have two, well, then you're keen on it, obviously, and you're getting two people saying it. They'll all be saying very much the same. No one that I've ever read is one versus the other. It just, one puts a bit more emphasis on this point, one puts a bit more emphasis on that point, which is just a natural human trait, isn't it?
Beautiful.
So if
and I'm mindful, sorry to interrupt, I'm just mindful of the time ticking along perhaps quicker than we had imagined.
Yes.
I believe you've got a few that you would most recommend or that you'll be referring to. Perhaps you could just very quickly go through that and then we might move on to the next point.
Well, I haven't got a list or any with me. I had sort of planned to do that or mention those on future podcasts.
All right, beautiful. We'll touch on it at that point.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
The last thing I'd like to say, though, Jacqui, is just on that description of the Gita is, and it's only 3 lines, is that the 700 verses are broken up or divided into 18 chapters in the Gita. So all Gitas have 18 chapters, and they're all titled the same title or similar title, and then it progresses. So it's just important that we have some understanding of this, that the first 6 chapters refer to the mortal, of course, being us, human beings, me talking to you, whoever's listening and wanting to know. The second 6 chapters refer to the immortal, God, or in the Gita, it's called Brahman, Lord Brahman. And the final 6 chapters refer to the mortal and the immortal coming together, which is a beautiful end to the journey. So the first 6 chapters focus on us, and we'll be looking at those different chapters and topics there. Then the next 6 talk about the Lord, the God, give us some idea. Difficult to talk about God because it's only a word game at that stage. Eventually one has to make a connection, and then that's called a spiritual experience, and one understands fully what that means. So that's all I plan to say about the Gita, Jacqui. It's a sequential work. We need to put all the pieces of the jigsaw. It's only when we get to the end that it all comes crystal. But the point I'd also like to make very clearly is that we don't have to wait till the end of all of these podcasts for changes to start happening in our lives. almost with this podcast, you might already be more sure of what you're doing and why you're doing it and where you're going. Each podcast will strengthen, and if you put it, what you're hearing, into practice, you prove to yourself by putting it into practice, and you'll start seeing pretty quickly benefits. Less stress in your minds, less emotional reaction on your parts, in situation where you otherwise, would have blown your stack or started crying or whatever it might have been. Jacqui?
Beautiful. Yeah, lovely overview. All right. Well, I'm aware that we've got a bit of material to get through, but we do have only about 5 minutes left. So we're going to have to do perhaps a summary of this, and then these next points we might come back to. Now, I think I've got here in the background some images here that you wanted to speak to quickly. So this first one, does that show up on the screen, the Temple of Apollo?
Well, I can't see it on mine, Jacqui.
Can't see it yet. No, thank you. Let me just have a quick look here if I can share. Okay, all right. We might have to save the diagrams for another session, because actually the way to share that is not immediately apparent to me. Would you rather touch on the diagrams, particularly the one out of your book, in another session, or would you like to just speak to it today without the image and give an overview and we come back to it?
No, whatever you would like to do, Jacqui, whatever suits you best. I don't mind.
All right. Maybe could we have a 1-minute explanation of what's in that diagram? I know you were interested to just explain. I think it was a human being in their entirety and the different layers of being. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe we could just have, I know this is a challenge for you. Can we have a 1-minute summary with the awareness that we're going to come back and talk about it in greater depth at a future point in time?
It's not that much of a challenge. I can rise to that challenge, Jacqui. The diagram that Jacqui's referring to is what I use to illustrate points that I constantly make in the teachings with the groups. But it basically shows in a diagram form each human being. And I've made a reference, I was going to come to a point here where it's saying that as a human being, we're a complex entity, very complex entity, far complex than most of us realize. And that's because of that unawareness makes life's problems what they are. So the diagram that Jacqui's referring to, and then I'm going to quickly refer to, is visualize a 3-story building, and I've got that divided into like 3 floors, obviously, and on the diagram it shows on the bottom the physical, and just got a picture of a human being, the physical body, the mind, the emotion, the 5 senses, and then leading in to the 2nd floor of the 5 senses, that they lead from the physical into what's called the subtle part of our being on the 2nd floor. And that's the critical part. That's the guts of every human being. You can describe it as the engine room. That's the computer sort of complex. In that 2nd floor are 4 major components of every human being. There's the emotional aspect of the being, sometimes called the heart. There's the mental aspect of the being, the mind. So they're working, you all recognize that you've got them, and they work very frequently all through the day, every day, and even at nighttime, in dreams and so on. The 3rd component in there is what's called the ego. Now, some people don't know what ego is. Some have a misunderstanding and they think of egoistic people, but the ego is much more difficult and whatever than that. And the 4th component quickly is what I call the buddhi, or your divine self, your higher self. It's sometimes called the 3rd eye, the inner vision, intuition, your higher self. Yeah. So they're the 4 components. Most people know the 2, emotions and mind. Very few understand the other 2 and how they work and don't work. And the 3rd component is what's called your soul, or your divine aspect, and your buddhi. The finest one of those 4 that I've just outlined is sort of like your stairway into the 3rd floor, into your true nature. That's what you're looking for, that's within you. And then above that diagram, separate from it, but everything underneath it gets its source of energy from it, and it's often called the source. I prefer to call it consciousness. Some people call it the absolute, the supreme being, logos. Again, any term you want to use, they're only words, but as long as you understand that that's the highest thing that you're aware of, well, that's what I'll be referring to always as consciousness. So there you go, Jacqui.
And that's a beautiful point. I was thinking earlier, because we started off mentioning that this goes well beyond, or it's not a religion, it's a philosophy that really came before religions, and there was mention of I think God and a conversation with Lord Brahman. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm thinking this terminology for those that listening that are perhaps newer to spiritual philosophy, this awareness that, some people are very comfortable with the word God, some people would rather use creator, some people think of consciousness, universal force or energy. You've used a few other lovely descriptors there. So we're going to touch, of course, on a lot more words and descriptions and understandings. But if you're listening and some of this terminology is really new, know that you can replace the terminology with other words of your choosing.
100%, Jacqui. 100%.
We really have one more minute. So I'm going to say one final thing and then hand over to you for the wrap up. I'm going to share a book that I just ordered through the week, and I know that Michael endorses this, which is why I feel confident to share. I'm going to hold it up to the screen. This is the Bhagavad Gita. It's called A Walkthrough for Westerners by Jack Hawley. So if some of you are looking for the most introductory version, if you've never read it before, I know that Michael would recommend this one. There are others that are more in depth. I've just started reading this, and I have to say I'm reading it with great joy and delight. It's so easy to read and so easy to understand, even though the concepts, the topics are big and large, but they're digestible, which I really like. So anyway, that's just my little sharing. Thank you for everyone that's tuned in and listening. Michael and I are very, very excited. We've had a few technological challenges in just getting to this first recording, so we've done a lot of groundwork prior to now, but we're thrilled to get this first one underway. We're going to see and share with you shortly with our next episode, and we'll be moving through the chapters. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Michael to wrap up, and I believe there's a sharing or a quote, something to conclude with.
Yeah, and it's a lovely recommendation of that book, Jacqui. I couldn't recommend it more highly for people who are at early stages. That's a beautiful lead in. And just on that little topic, if any people have got either a Gita and you have never looked at it, or only briefly years ago and it's there, you might actually want to start looking at it. Or if you haven't got a Gita and this is your first sort of introduction or hearing of it, you might be able to tap in onto your computers or Facebooks or something and bring up some snippets and just see, get a bit of familiarity with it. So I'd like to, again, like Jacqui says, thank you for listening to this third podcast. It's ended up being easier than I thought it was going to be. So I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed now. But I'd like to leave you all with a lovely, beautiful quote where it talks about the seeker of truth, which I would presume is myself and Jacqui and everyone listening here, whichever words you want to use, but we're seeking something, aren't we? Otherwise, you wouldn't be tuning into it. Well, what you're really seeking is truth. Okay, and in this, from the Upanishads, there's this lovely prayer or dedication, if you like, where it says, "The seeker of truth pleads, lead me from the dark to light, lead me from ignorance to truth, and lead me from bondage to liberation." So over and out, folks. Thank you very much.